Good afternoon and welcome to the Queen's Student Alumni Association's panel, Women of Influence STEM. On behalf of the entire executive, we are incredibly excited to have you all here today. My name is Shasha Vijayaratna and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth year in the Geography and Planning Department and I'm the Director of Student Transition. Before we begin, please make sure that your mics are muted and to turn off your cameras. On behalf of the Queen's Student Alumni Association, I would like to begin by acknowledging our presence on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island. While all of us here are encouraged to honor the history of the land from our respective locations, it is my responsibility to reflect on QSAA and the privileges we experience as a result of a colonial project. Queen's University and the organizations that represent this institution have deep colonial roots, and it is only through colonialization and destruction that I have the ability to learn, work, and play on these lands and waterways. We need to be open to the truths of the past and be willing to listen, learn, and attempt to understand our own positions and what has come to us as a result of those who came before. I urge us all to consider our own positionality as we gather online today. As we all join in from different locations, I would like to remind everyone to please carefully follow our code of conduct. Once again, we ask that all participants please keep their cameras turned off and stay muted during the session. During the Q&A portion, questions can be directed to Abigail through the chat function if you do not want to turn your camera on, or through the raise hand function. If your hand is raised, you will be called upon, at which point please turn on your camera and mic before you proceed. The questions can be directed to the entire panel or a specific panelist. The session will be recorded so that students who are unable to attend the live session will be able to watch it after. We remind everyone to be respectful and have a safe discussion. Before I hand it over to our moderator, Abigail, I would like to open the floor to Alyssa, our marketing director. Alyssa, you're muted.
Sorry about that. There we go. So yeah, I'm the marketing director, and I was just hoping if everyone could quickly actually turn on their camera so that I could grab a few pictures for our socials. I'll give everyone a few seconds. All right, amazing. So I'm going to count to 3 and then everyone can just kind of freeze for a few seconds. That would be amazing. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, and hold 1 second. All right, and 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. So now if you guys all could turn off your cameras and you can actually click on anyone who doesn't have their camera on to then click on hide all non-video participants to get the full experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Now we will begin the panel portion of our event, and I will hand it off to our wonderful moderator, Abigail Lee.
Hey everyone, so my name is Abigail and I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently in my second year majoring in mechanical engineering. I'm one of the ambassadors for QSAA and involved in STEM here at Queen's. My experience in engineering thus far has provided me with the opportunity to run the 2021 Queen's Space Conference, and I'm currently working with the Queen's Rocket Engineering team in developing their dark matter payload for their rocket. With that said, I am so excited to be introducing our panelists for this evening. We are incredibly privileged to have a diverse set of panelists here with us today. Nika Elmi is currently completing her Master's of Science in Public Health with a certificate in Humanitarian Health and Maternal and Child Health. In the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health, her research involves the use of app technology to address concerns and disparities in long-acting reversible contraception use, as well as investigating the effects of intimate partner violence on pregnant adolescents in Mali. In the Department of Epidemiology, Nika focuses on disproportionality affected by HIV in West Africa. As a researcher in the Key Populations Program, KPP, Nika explores health disparities and inequalities through direct engagement with partners in Francophone West Africa to work towards population health data support and capacity building. These inequities are explored and addressed locally in Baltimore, where Nika works as a licensed HIV counselor and tester. Nika graduated with a Bachelor's of Science from Queen's University. As a Francophone student, Nika is also involved in the programmatic efforts of Breakthrough Action Guinea, USAID's flagship global social and behavioral change project, active in over 25 countries and growing. Angie Dawsey is currently a senior policy advisor and gender equality lead for the International Institute for Sustainable Development. She has held various positions with CARE International Poverty, Environment and Climate Change Network Canada, including a senior advisor for adaptation, learning, and knowledge management, as well as the Climate Change Adaptation Coordinator. Angie has more than 15 years of experience working on climate change, livelihoods, and poverty in a variety of social and environmental contexts in Africa and Asia. She holds expertise in climate change adaptation planning and in integrating climate change and environmental sustainability into developmental programs, notably in water, agriculture, and food security. Angie graduated from Queen's University with her Bachelor's of Science, Engineering in Geological Environmental Engineering. Dr. Christine Williams is an immunologist and currently serves as the Deputy Director and Head Clinical Translation at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, the OICR. As part of OICR's executive team, Dr. Williams works with the Institute's scientists, senior leaders, and partners to develop and implement strategic priorities across the Institute's research programs. Dr. Williams received an undergraduate degree in life sciences from Queen's University and a PhD in immunology from the University of Toronto. She received postdoctoral training at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard University, where she studied the molecular pathways involved in the development of leukemia and lymphoma in children. Prior to her role at OICR, Dr. Williams held various leadership positions at the Canadian Cancer Society, most recently as its Chief Mission Officer and Scientific Director, responsible for strategy development and program delivery nationwide. Dr. Williams is currently a member of boards and advisory committees for a number of organizations, including the Canadian Cancer Research Alliance, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CanPath, the Canadian Cancer Clinical Trials Group, and BioCanRx. I'm very excited to hear from this incredible panel of women. So now let's get into questions we have for our panelists. The first question I'd like to start with is, what advice would you give your younger self or today's youth in navigating career goals as a woman in STEM? Nika, can you go first, followed by Angie and Dr. Williams?
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to virtually meet you all. This is a really important question, and it's actually a question that I've asked a lot of my mentors so that I can kind of learn from their experiences. And it's something that I hope a lot of you have heard already, which is that every room that you walk into, you absolutely belong in. But one thing that I didn't know about this statement is that not everyone's going to invite you into that room to begin with. So it's really important that you make your own opportunities. And what I mean by that is basically like the underlining message and everything that I'll say today is emails are your best friend. Most of the opportunities that I've gotten to this day, like most of the things that were said in my bio happened because I built my own networks. No one in my family was in STEM. My father was a refugee. My mother was an immigrant from Iran. Their goal was to make ends meet, and it was kind of up to me to carve my path in STEM as I wanted to see it. So what I did was, starting at 16, I really wanted to learn about psychiatric illnesses in a lab, just because there was a lot of mental illness in my family and I needed to see it in a lab. So I sent, I think, 30 different emails as a 16-year-old to U of T faculty, because I'm from north of Toronto. And I said, you know what, this is my story. And for each of those emails, I looked up what they researched, what their most recent publications were, what they're working on now, if they've gotten any new grants. So it was hours taken away from my homework to write these emails. And I asked them if I could come into their lab and volunteer for them. And everyone said no, except for one woman, Dr. Anna Andriazza. She's at U of T. And she said, you know what, come in and let's chat. No promises, but let's chat. So I went in and she said, no one gave me these opportunities when I was your age, so I want to be that person for you. and she let me volunteer in her lab. And that actually led to, at 16, taking a graduate research position with her. And then, you know, out of that came 5 publications by the time I was in first year at Queen's. So none of that would have happened if I wasn't proactive about finding the people who I thought could support me and just putting myself out there and being okay with rejection. Out of the 30 emails that I sent, 29 of them said no to me, but 1 said yes, and all I needed was 1. So it ended up being okay. You know, no one's thinking about the 29 that said they couldn't at that time. So emails are your best friend. Make opportunities for yourself and learn how to take failure really well. Not to say that that's not hard, you know, still to this day, if I get a rejection about something that I'm really passionate about, it upsets me, I'm upset, I take my time to kind of grieve that rejection, but then I learn how to be really proactive about it and how to use that to leverage myself in some way, how to let that fuel me. So getting comfortable with hearing the word no is actually one of the best things that could have happened to me, and we'll get into it later, but I have a big list of all the no's I've received and how they were probably the best things that could have happened to me. So get comfy with no, send your emails, and, you know, make opportunities for yourself.
So I have 2 pieces of advice. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I should say that first. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And thanks for the invitation to join with some really exciting other panelists. So I have 2 pieces of advice. The first is to be flexible and open-minded about your career. When I started studying engineering, I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And honestly, when I graduated, I wasn't all that much clearer. And so I really sought out a lot of different experiences and tried to figure out where I fit, what made me feel passionate, what made me feel energized. And that really put me on a path that I never would have imagined in 2nd or 3rd year of engineering. So that's one. The second is to foster relationships with women in your field, both as friends and as mentors. I'm so lucky. I have this network of women who work on climate change that I connect with both professionally and personally. And some of them are really dear friends of mine. And over the years, this has really made my work a lot easier and my career progression a lot easier and also a lot more fun. We really support each other. We share our joys, we share our frustrations, we talk about work over wine. And I honestly wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't developed those relationships. And I feel really lucky to have them.
I'm glad I'm going last. I'm furiously taking notes because these are really good ideas. and I guess that's one thing I would say is that you know, this is meant to be thinking about what advice you would give your younger self. But I think one thing I would impress upon you is that you never really stop developing and you never really stop feeling like you're on a path and really like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I think that feeling doesn't go away. So I would encourage you to get comfortable with that feeling. And it kind of goes with what Nika was saying about, and what Angie was saying about being open to opportunities and making your own opportunities and recognizing that there are multiple paths to get you where you want to go. And it's not a straight line. So you're going to make choices, you're going to take opportunities, and you're not necessarily going to see exactly where they're going. And I think being comfortable with that, be a little bit comfortable with discomfort, try things that put you a little outside of your comfort zone and be willing to take some of those risks and you'll end up there. But I think sometimes you look at people ahead of you and think, you know, when you read our bios, it seems like, oh, it's so obvious that's what you became because that was the path you took. But recall that at the time, none of us knew exactly where we were going. So it's a bit more of a mangrove swamp than it is a straight highway. And that's okay. You're going to feel like you're in the swamp all the time. But as you're doing that, you're going to have all kinds of opportunities. And then the other thing I would suggest that's different from what everybody else said, because I agree with what they said, is it's really important to be authentic. So that whole idea of getting to know who you are and self-awareness, but spending time learning about who you are and being that person at work. Don't try to be a different person in your career. Try to reflect who you truly are in what you do, and that will encourage people to give you opportunities that really fit you and suit you, and that don't be a different person at home than you are at work, because that's very stressful and difficult. So spend some time, and in some cases that's a little bit brave, right? You have to be a little bit vulnerable, but try to work on that sense of authenticity, because I think that brings a lot of rewards in the end.
Those are all really great to hear. The next question is, what was the pivotal moment in your career, knowing that this was the right path for you? So I'd like to begin with Angie, followed by Christine, and then Nika.
Well, I would agree with Christine on the fact that it's a pretty windy path. So I would say there were a few moments of questioning and a few moments where it felt right. But I'll point to one that would be considered pivotal. I left a job with the federal government to go and work with CARE International on a project in Bangladesh. And, the federal government job, it was pretty good. It was relatively stable, but I really felt like I needed some on the ground experience. And I wanted to be working on the projects, not just writing briefing notes about them. And I also thought that working for an NGO was probably a better fit for me than working for the government. And it turned out I was totally right on that point. So the project was in southwestern Bangladesh, in an area with a lot of mangroves, linking back to Christine's point about the mangrove swamp. And it was one of the first projects that really tried to tackle climate change from a community-based perspective. And it also had a really strong gender angle, looking at how women and men are differently affected by the impacts of climate change and what that means for their needs and capacities related to adapting to the impacts. And that was really an eye-opener for me in relation to gender equality. So it was a really challenging assignment, but I learned a ton, and it helped me to start to develop my networks in the climate change community. And that project, that experience of living in Bangladesh really just laid the foundation for everything that I've done since.
I think is it me next? Me next? Yes. So I had a pretty traditional academic path for the first part of my career. So I did my undergrad at Queen's, as you heard, and then I did a PhD at U of T in immunology. I was always really interested in labs. I worked in labs, somewhat similar to Nika, actually. I worked in labs as a summer job for many years, and then ended up, and in fact, I was working in a lab as a summer job after Queen's, and the supervisor in my lab actually said, do you want to stay on and do graduate school? And, I wasn't doing anything else. So it seemed like a good idea. So that's how I ended up getting my PhD. And then I looked around for postdoctoral. I actually got accepted to medical school and decided not to go at that point because I felt very, very old at age 29. So I moved to Boston and did a postdoc and thought I'd be there for 2 years. I actually spent 5.5 years. I got married, I had a baby, like a lot of stuff happens along the way. And then we moved back to Canada, back to Toronto, and I didn't have a job, and I was looking at different jobs, but I was pretty sure that I didn't want to run a lab. Like I just knew that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, even though I was pretty good at it and I enjoyed it, but I didn't think I had enough passion and commitment to do that full time. And that's when I took a job at the Canadian Cancer Society. And I remember having a bit of a panic about it because it was one of those times when there was a fork in the road, but it was very clear that I was making a choice, because once you're off that academic path, it's a little hard to get back on it. So I remember taking that, being a little panicky about taking that job because it was so different, and talking to my postdoctoral supervisor, calling her in Boston. And she said, look, try it for 6 months. If you don't like it in 6 months, you can come back to academia, but after about 6 months is going to be too long. So she gave me a really specific window of time. But she said, I think you should try it. I think you should see what it's like. And I can tell you that for 5 of those 6 months, I was sure I'd made a horrible mistake. So I thought, oh my God, how am I, like, this can't be right. And then something happened in that 6 months, that 6th month, where I realized that I was actually pretty good at this, that it gave me a much broader experience of science and cancer research specifically, but also corporate things that I was really interested in, didn't have any exposure to before. And then I suddenly realized that a lot of the people around me were really smart. It took me a while to figure out that just because they came from different backgrounds and weren't academic, that they didn't have a lot to contribute. And I suddenly appreciated the people around me and really kind of realized that I had a good fit. So that was really my experience in knowing that this big decision I'd made sort of intuitively to try something different actually was right. But it took some time. It took me a good 6 months and a lot of adjustment to working in an office. For people who worked in labs and you stand all day and walk all day and there's endless conversation and a lot of really loud music and blah, 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 blah. Working in an office was brutal, but now I'm very used to sitting.
That's awesome. Very relatable with the standing up in a lab and wondering when you get to sit next. But for me, I didn't necessarily have an aha moment or like a clear pivotal, fork in the road for me. I think what just happened was bio at a young age was what I was good at and what I enjoyed studying. And so that kind of snowballed into, okay, I'll do an undergraduate degree in the life sciences, because at Queen's, when I did it, was still pretty broad. Like you could take so many different types of sciences within the life sciences. So I did that. I minored in art history. And I think as I progressed, I just found more moments that reassured me that I was on the right path. Like in anything that I did, I kept looking for ways to apply it to my field, to the things that I was studying. Like in art history, I was drawn to the history of medicine and then tie that into like, okay, how are illustrations used for the anatomy textbooks we have today? Or I took a course in my 2nd year, Global and Population Health at Queen's, which I'm now leading. And that was the course that kind of made me realize, oh, okay, I care about women's health a lot and I care about it in humanitarian settings. And so that's basically what I'm doing for my thesis now at Johns Hopkins. But even in my 4th year, I was reassured, and, it kept snowballing until 4th year. But even in my 4th year, I was like, okay, wait, am I applying to med schools? Am I applying to grad programs in mental health and women's health? Like I had so many varied interests. And, I ended up at Hopkins, I think because I like reading their site is what excited me the most. Like looking at the types of courses I would have available to me, the types of people that were doing research that I would be really excited by. So I think it's really just asking yourself, what fuels me? Like, what am I really excited about? What can I talk a lot about, and, without getting bored and without boring other people, hopefully, and kind of just finding your niche. But I say that, but even now I still have all these varied, interests in the sciences. So I think I'd just say to think about what fuels you. And that's, again, not to say that, in my 2nd year of life sci, when I was taking micro and I was taking, organic chemistry and all these things, I wasn't in the library questioning all the life decisions that I'd made up until that point. You absolutely will do that. But the end goal will still excite you, like completing all of those things and then looking back and thinking, yeah, I did that. That's when you're still doing something that's, nourishing you. So, now I'm in epidemiology in the sciences. First I was in psychiatric illness and then women's health and now epidemiology. And I love it because you can talk about health in such a different way. It includes so many different fields. It lets you quantify things that, my parents would talk about things in mental health and I would be able to be like, oh, I'm actually quantifying this protein that shows XYZ. So yeah, I think it's just finding the things that fuel you and just running with it because it'll work out on its own.
Awesome. So our next question, have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome? If so, how did you mitigate those intrusive thoughts to move forward? I'd like to be with Christine, then Nika, and Angie.
Okay, so this is where I wish everybody had their video on, because I think if you did a show of hands, has anyone ever felt like an imposter? I bet everybody would put their hand up. We all do, and we all feel like it all the time. And I don't think that that's the exclusive purview of women. I think men feel that way too, lots of times, but I do think women are a little bit more susceptible to it. And I loved what Nika said right at the beginning, that I hope you know that any room you're in, oh, how did you say it? Anyway, you can repeat it later, Nika, and tell me how you said it properly, but that was a cool concept, right? Any room you're in is a room you should be in. And even if you invited yourself into that room. So I think that, so the short answer is yes. And, but how do you get rid of some of those thoughts? I mean, I think, acknowledge they're often there, realize that almost everybody has them. There's a certain amount of, faking confidence that I would really recommend. Like sometimes you just, even, as I was saying earlier, even when you feel outside of your comfort zone, sometimes you have to be the person to put your hand up, even if you can feel your palms are sweating because you're afraid to ask that question, or you're afraid, that volunteering to do this thing or offering to be on a particular committee is probably a little outside of your purview. That's okay. Like, I think sometimes you want to project confidence, even if you don't completely feel it. And that becomes becomes a reciprocal thing, because people will be confident in you because you're projecting it. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing is to, and this has come up a lot, and I'm sure it'll come up through the whole conversation, but find people who will support you, like surround yourself with people who will support you, and find mentors. And again, they don't have to be women, although it's important to have some women mentors, I think. But you can also have great male mentors, but have those people around you who will support you, but challenge you, reflect back to you that you're doing a really good job on something, but also be honest enough to say to you, you probably could have done a bit better there. That wasn't your best. and be honest with you. If you say, oh, I think I messed that up, and they say, yeah, it wasn't, you could have done better. And let's talk about how you could have done that better. And also people who not just support you, but on paper, but who will really say to others, I'd like to put this person forward. I really recommend this person. So active mentoring in promotion. So I say those are the two big things. Try to find your inner confidence, even if you're faking it a little bit, and surround yourself with people who will support you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that goes back into the whole thing of the whole room, imagery that we have going on, is find people who will say your name in the rooms that you're not in. And that's how I've been, nudged to think about mentorship. But to answer this question, yeah, of course, all the time, still to this day, like 5 minutes ago before we started this panel. Imposter syndrome is something that I think it's super natural, but it's really important to kind of channel in to, yes, as Christine said, acknowledge it when we're feeling it, realize when it's there, and like, oh, that's why I feel the way that I do right now. But also try to unpack that and think, okay, why? Just being at my school at Hopkins, I'm the youngest person in my program. I'm one of the few that doesn't have an MD that's doing this. So there's a lot of, things that I could list for you for all the reasons I shouldn't be there. So I thought about that, and I was like, okay, but I'm still being granted some really cool positions. Like, yeah, I was the only person selected to be an HIV counselor. Again, still the youngest person in the room, the only white passing person on that team, which was another thing that made me feel like, okay, is this a space that I should be in? And then, it got to a point during my grad studies where it was a bit debilitating, where I was like, well, then, why am I doing all of these things if with everything that I do, with every conversation that I have, I'm either questioning myself or, I'm feeling like I'm being questioned, even if that's not necessarily there. So what I actually did was I took my CV, I extended it because it always, we boil it down to 1 or 2 pages. So I extended it to include things that I'm really proud of. Even, I won a spoken word poetry competition when I was 16. I threw that in there, and I had a really nice list of things that I accomplished, both on my own and with the help of my mentors and, all my friends that helped me along the way. And then under each, I wrote, how did I get there? What did it take for me to get myself in that spot? So that spoken word poetry, okay, that competition, I, took a 1.5-hour bus and train to Toronto once a month to, do the monthly poetry series. I did, XYZ. For all my research, I sent this many emails. I had to get, these grades. So for everything that I had the story of what got me there. And the common line throughout all of it was my own resilience and my own persistence. So every time I forgot that, or I needed someone to remind myself of that, I just had it on my phone before an interview or before anything. And I would just pull it up and read through and be like, oh, hold on. No, you did that. That was good. And that was enough for me to, get through that meeting or that day or that seminar where, I'm talking to people who are running NGOs and, I have zero experience doing that. So that was nice. Just a little gentle reminder for yourself of I got my, even being, accepted to Queen's. It took everyone on this call so many things. You guys had to do so many different things to even get here. So just having that right under your degree to remind yourselves of all of the efforts that have already been put in to, come to this awesome place is pretty remarkable. So I think just being our own cheerleader and having a foam finger, in the back of our heads before every kind of formative moment in our lives is super important.
Wow, I'm loving what I'm hearing. I'm not sure my example is as interesting, but or my advice as wise, but I mean, yes, I've obviously felt imposter syndrome many times in my career, and when I was thinking about this question, one of the things that came to mind was I was in that federal government job that I mentioned earlier, and I was selected to be part of the Canadian delegation to the UN Climate Conference in Milan. So this was COP9, and we're now on COP26. So I'm showing my age a little bit here. But so this was not only my first time in Europe, but it was my first time experiencing anything like UN negotiations. And I was totally overwhelmed. And I, had these moments of just, what am I doing here? And I think, I actually, to go back to the room, what I did was to tell myself, they invited me into this room. They wouldn't have put me on the delegation if they didn't think I actually had something to contribute. So I tried to do that role as well as I could, and also just to take it as an experience to learn from what was going on around me and the more senior members of the team. And I think what's been great is that since then I've been to a lot of these crazy events, and I've been able to help colleagues navigate the process. So, it's all about establishing priorities. Where's the coffee? Where are the toilets? Explaining the hundreds of acronyms, providing moral support when it's all just a bit too much, because it is a pretty full-on experience. And strangely, COPs have sort of become one of the highlights of my professional year. I actually really enjoy going now and just catching up with people and being in that crazy environment and feeling connected to this global community working to solve the climate crisis.
So with COVID-19, there have been challenges in all fields. Would you have any advice for anyone trying to overcome the hurdles that come alongside a global pandemic? Nika, I'll start with you, then Angie and Christine.
Yeah, I think for this one, I might have already said it, but the opportunities are there. It's just a matter of finding them. And if I've learned anything being at Hopkins, it's that it's usually within people's networks. So-and-so knows someone who, offers them an opportunity. And if you don't have that network, which I definitely didn't, it's important to build that for yourself. So it really, I think the most tangible piece of advice that I can give is it goes back to the emailing. Like a lot of people do, every position that I hold right now is remote. I'm working for the International Rescue Committee. Their headquarters is based in New York, which is where I would have had to have been to even apply for the position. But now, because of COVID, people from all over the States could have applied, and somehow I got it. So there's a lot, I wouldn't say more, because definitely a lot of positions have been hindered because of this, but there are positions available that maybe wouldn't have been available to you before, like purely because of the nature of it being online now. So it's just a matter of finding organizations that you're interested in and then just sending them an email being like, are there any projects coming up that could be remote that I could work on from where I'm based in so-and-so. Even with research positions, I'm in public health. To that, lots of profs, of PhD students who need help with data analysis, who need help with report writing op-eds, writing so many different things, which is how I spent a lot of my time is helping with qualitative studies. You can do that from home, and a lot of places do have the budget to pay you for that. So it's just a matter of reaching out to people and kind of doing a quick landscape analysis to see if you can find any opportunities. Because even before here, I did a quick search on our standard, job searching browsers like Indeed and even LinkedIn. And, I'd say the vast majority of things aren't advertised. So again, just reaching out to, schools near you, different programs, different communities near you, and kind of just finding those opportunities.
So for me, I think one of the few positive things that's going to come out of this pandemic for people who are working from home anyway, is that we've been a lot more exposed to our colleagues' lives outside work. So we've seen children, we've seen pets, we've seen their home offices or their kitchens, depending on the case. And in the case of my team, who I love, we've gotten a lot better about checking in on each other. So we do take those few minutes at the beginning of a call to ask, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? And I think we're getting a lot more open about sharing how we're all kind of struggling, as most people are at this moment in the pandemic. And I also see that people are being more upfront about what they need to manage their mental health. So for me right now, that's often leaving my desk before dark to get out for a little cross-country ski to clear my head. And I'm really lucky because my boss has a similar approach. So that makes it easy for us to sort of follow her lead. It's okay to leave your desk for an hour and go for a walk or go for a ski. And, that's what we need to do. And to show up for our team basically is to take care of ourselves. So I think my advice is really, first, take care of your own mental health. And then second, check in on your colleagues, because I think more than ever, we really need to create this space for open and safe conversations about health and well-being, and particularly in the professional context.
Yeah, I agree with all of that for sure. I mean, I think that one of the things the pandemic has brought is, I think, a newfound recognition of the importance of empathy. And empathy has always been a leadership quality that I think is really important. And with that, as I think I said earlier, it comes a certain amount of vulnerability. I think everybody feels very vulnerable right now, and that, as Angie said, there's a lot of the personal now in the professional sphere. So, you can see, so first of all, I texted my children and threatened them within an inch of their lives not to come down during this session, as an example, downstairs, because I'm in my basement. But, you can see behind me, like I have, artwork that my little nieces did for me and, random stuff like that. That's, it's much more of a personal view of people. And I found it very interesting during the pandemic that, particularly in Canada, that most of the public health leadership we've seen has been from women. And, a lot of the public health officers, both that have a fairly high profile, both in the municipalities and the provinces, have been women. And I think that there is, I think that's not a coincidence. I think probably a lot of women go into public health because of that a bit more of an empathetic approach possibly to health. But I think all the time about that, what Dr. Bonnie Henry says all the time about be kind, be calm, and be safe. And I think that those are words to live by right now. We don't know what's going on in other people's lives, a little bit more about what the background is in their Zoom, but you don't know all of the other stresses going on in their lives. Many people are dealing with you know, they're concerned about their finances. They have little kids that they're trying to homeschool. I mean, thank goodness I have teenagers, you know, things like that. So I think that encouraging everybody, and I'm the worst at this because I'm not a patient person, but everyone to bring a little bit more patience. You know, you know you're going to have to wait in line for the grocery store. You don't know what the person in front of you is going through, and so I think that I think that all the time. Be kind, be calm, be safe. I think it's really good advice.
Awesome. So what is the most rewarding experience that you all have had in your fields? So I'll begin with Angie, then Christine, and then Nika.
This was a tough one. I mean, I guess I'm lucky because I think I have had quite a number of rewarding experiences in my career over the years. So reflecting, I think what I wanted to share was that every time I see someone's mindset shift, even just a little bit, I get a bit of a thrill. So to give you an example, I recently helped to facilitate a workshop in Jamaica where ISD was working with UN Women. And we brought together a bunch of government representatives and put them through 2.5 days of learning about gender equality and how it links to climate change adaptation. And, you know, at the beginning, there were a number of the participants who were male and who tended to work in the more technical fields like transport or agriculture to a certain extent. And they weren't really convinced that there was a gender issue in Jamaica. And their basis for this was that there are a lot of women in leadership positions in the government. So after a couple of days exploring, you know, questions around bias, talking about gender-based violence in the country, and just looking at all the ways that, you know, discrimination can limit people's opportunities and exacerbate vulnerability to climate change, we really started to see a shift in how they were looking at things. And one of the participants, male, used the phrase "mind blown" to describe the experience. And, you know, this seems like a really small thing, like just changing the mind of a handful of bureaucrats, but, you know, they're decision makers. They can change policies. They can influence how government programs are designed and implemented. So for me, it just really makes me feel like I've achieved something when I'm pushing their thinking forward on an issue as important as gender equality.
So I'm glad you said this is such a hard question because I also found this a really difficult question. Because there are so many things, right? And it depends on, like, is it rewarding? You know, what about it was rewarding? And I was thinking back on a number of things. I mean, so maybe I'll talk about two. One is one that is surprisingly rewarding is seeing people that you supervise do well. So seeing people develop and having a role in their development. And there's nothing more stressful than having someone that reports to you give a presentation that you have to sit quietly and listen to. Like it's like it's amazingly how stressful it is. And I don't really get stressed about my kids doing stuff, but people that are like my work kids, I get really stressed about. So it's great. It is incredibly rewarding to see people do well, and to feel that you had a small role in that. It is a great feeling. The other thing I was thinking about, and this actually goes back more to my previous role at the Canadian Cancer Society, but one of the things I found incredibly rewarding was talking to the sort of so-called lay public or community about science and the importance of science. And that walking through a presentation, for example, about cancer and cancer research and what it is and why it's important and the impact it's had, and seeing people just go like, wow, that's incredible. That's amazing. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't understand how that worked before. We've made incredible progress. That's a really rewarding feeling. So to bring that appreciation of science and what it means to our everyday lives to people who don't necessarily think about it all the time is a great thing. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, just first to say that I'm incredibly inspired by what both of you have said so far. Yeah, I think just going off of what's already been said, the mindset shift is something that I've experienced in public health that has been so hugely rewarding. And also, being able to mentor high school students, like Christine, you said, of being involved in someone's personal development is also something that's super, super rewarding. I think if I were to draw on a specific experience, it would have to be when I was doing HIV counseling in Baltimore. That was, it involved a lot of growth, because I had to learn how to become a really good listener, and I had to learn that that listening, being able to listen, it's like a muscle. Like you can train yourself to be an active listener, not in an unauthentic way, but in a way that allows you to serve the people that you're with a little bit better. So how to really engage in a conversation, to really try to listen to what someone's saying. And as an HIV counselor, I felt a little bit, not just a little bit out of it, because I didn't know if I knew how to do that well enough. And I was working with the state's crisis response team. So we had a truck and we would go to different areas where we were called to administer HIV tests and counseling. And a lot of the women with were, and so I had to learn how to, as someone who will never have the experiences that a lot of the women that I worked with had, how can I still feel like I'm helping, or I'm being useful in some way for them in the way that they needed. So I think learning how to adapt to different situations was super rewarding. Learning how to listen, because that served me in, as an HIV counselor, in my personal life with my parents, who I would be the most impatient with, and then I'd reflect and be like, oh, hold on, you work at the peer support center where your job is to listen. You're an HIV counselor where your job is to listen, and you can't listen with your parents. So it challenged me to, just be a better person, both in the professional sphere and in the personal sphere. So I think just overall, the most rewarding experience that I've had is just learning that skill and the importance of being a good active listener. And also just quickly, I would have to say the other most rewarding thing, looping back to the things I said at the beginning, was learning how to overcome failure. And the things that came from that was the most important, super rewarding for me. So just some quick example, most things that I've done at least 2 or 3 times, having done it not well to get there on the 3rd or 4th time. For example, I wrote my MCAT 3 times, got it on the 3rd time. I've applied to, multiple schools multiple times to get into where I am today. With the International Rescue Committee where I work now, I applied 3 times, got it on my 3rd time. So, learning how to be a good listener and learning how to be very politely persistent is something that I think was hugely formative in my development. And I'm still learning, but it's helped so far.
Awesome. So what in your Queen's undergrad career helped propel you in your successes today? Which initiatives, extracurriculars, or opportunities provided by Queen's aided you in your career path? So Christine, then Nika, and Angie.
This is also a hard question. By the way, I got to write down Nika, politely persistent. That's really good. Okay, so I really didn't like my first year of university. I have to tell you, I was one of those people who really liked high school. I had a really great time in high school and a lot of good friends. I went to high school and a public high school in Etobicoke in Toronto. And I found the adjustment to Queen's really difficult. I was I was a homebody, so I was really homesick going away. And it was also the first time I really kind of had to work at school. Up to then, I found it pretty easy. So it was very, very formative, a very formative time in my life. I actually almost left Queen's after first year because I thought I might want to be somewhere closer to home. And I only came back second year because I had been chosen to be a Gale and I felt this responsibility for Frosh Week. Anyway, the reasons you make decisions sometimes are so funny, but I knew it was the right choice to come back, and it absolutely was. But I think that what Queen's gave me was, first of all, that learning experience because of the atmosphere, but also I learned how to manage, to understand what I needed to be happy. And And I started to seek out things like, it was the first time in my life I really worked out just to work out. So I started swimming regularly to manage sort of my stress at the end of a day, and to just to have that endorphin feeling at the end of sitting and studying for hours. It really taught me, discipline and going to library and studying and all those sorts of things. It socially pushed me outside my comfort zone. I had to reach out to people and get to know people. And I also, through Queen's, found volunteer opportunities, and I worked, and I learned that was really, really important to me. And I've spent my whole life doing a lot of volunteer work. But Queen's is really where it started for me. And I worked for, at the time, an agency in Kingston that provided support for children who were victims of sexual child abuse, which was a pretty heavy thing to take on as a first-year university student. But it was again that feeling that I needed to be part of something bigger than myself. I needed to get outside of my own homesickness and work with people who had really, really difficult problems and contribute whatever I could. So Queen's, I remember going to the Queen's, sort of had some volunteer services or volunteer board, and finding something that I felt was something that I connected with, and that was really important to me. So all of those supports, I think, within the university community were important to me being successful there and being happy at the school.
Yeah, that's super important. And just building on that, I think for me, Queen's, I think it's really easy to be, quick to criticize ways that maybe it's not serving us, but there are also a lot of ways that we can help ourselves in these situations where we're having a tough time. So at Queen's, the Peer Support Center was something that was hugely formative in my life. I used it a lot in first year. And for those who don't know, it's a peer-run drop-in center. So they're not counselors or anything, but there's 2 rooms in the JDUC basement where you can go, and there's someone sitting there, and you can go have a tea or solve a puzzle or do something, and just talk about whatever is on mind. And it's free as well. So I used that a lot in first year. Going back to my failing at things theme, I applied to be a volunteer and didn't get it, but in my 4th year, I was the manager of it. So be persistent. So I used it a lot as a first year, and a second year as well, 3rd year when I ended up volunteering, and then 4th year when I was on the management team. And it's a great service. I think the engineering department has their own peer support center as well. You can use either, but there's a few resources like that that's really great outside of the counseling that's offered to students already. Something else that made me realize that I was interested in public health was the Queen's Project on International Development. This group, with them, I was able to go to Botswana for 3 months. Not volunteerism way, it's a really ethical organization, and something that you should look into if you're interested in international development. Also, none of these organizations reached out to me for me to plug them. It's just things that really genuinely did help me when I was a student, I think 2 years ago. So they were an awesome organization. And going back to the bit about making your own opportunities, in undergrad, I was really interested in psychiatric illness. And so I started a speaker series with the Queen's School of Medicine, the Queen's Talk Neuropsychiatry series. And every month we had someone in the field come in. It was open to Queen's undergrads, grads, med students, anyone, to talk about their research. And that's just something that we kicked off. I'm not sure if it's still running, but the point is, if it doesn't exist, you hit for yourself. And you can find people who want to join you in that, in pushing whatever your mission is. And finally, I'd say it's really important to also look outside of Queen's. Kingston itself is awesome. There are so many organizations, communities within Kingston itself that are, we're really privileged that sometimes they're open to having Queen's students be involved. So I was and still am a crisis line volunteer for the sexual assault call line in Kingston, SAC Kingston. They also have a student group on campus, or virtually now. And that's something that I found has been super, super fulfilling for me, to volunteer for that line and to train with them when I can. So all that to say that there are tons of things available, and I totally empathize with everyone that it's so hard to find those things now because it's all online. But reaching out to alumni, what I did in undergrad was I would find people's LinkedIns who are part of clubs and I'd message them. I think that was a bit excessive, but that's totally possible. Like you guys can message me, or I'm sure anyone on this panel, and you can be linked to something. And if you can't find it, you can always make it. It's super accessible to start a club through the AMS and to receive funding through them, which is something else that I chose to do with an online magazine. So it requires a bit of effort and support, but it is possible to find the right thing for you.
So I'm also going to talk about Cupid, Queen's Project on International Development. So when I arrived at Queen's, I had never been on a plane. And I had traveled very little outside the small town that I grew up in. So like Christine, I had a pretty massive adjustment, both to just being in this completely new environment and also to engineering and just the challenges associated with the program and not having had to work too hard in high school either. But in my second year, I learned about Cupid and I thought it was really interesting, and some of my friends were involved. And so I joined, and I met amazing people, and some of them are still my closest friends. And I think the discussions that we had throughout the school year were really foundational in how I view the world even today. So for those who aren't familiar with the organization, they sort of have meetings with speakers and discussions over the course of the year. And then there's the internship program that runs over the summer, where students can apply and do internships either overseas or I don't know if it's still happening in Northern Canada, but at that time there were also teams going to the North. So I couldn't afford to do an internship in between school years because I needed to make money to go back to school for the next year. But I decided that I was going to apply when I graduated, and I was selected for a water project in Guyana. So the flight that I took to Georgetown to volunteer for 3 months was the first flight I ever took. And honestly, today I really wonder how I had the courage to get on that plane, because I'm not sure I would right now if I was in the same situation. But I did, and it was amazing and it was challenging. And it really clarified for me that working internationally was what I wanted to do and set my path forward. And since then, I've lived in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Ghana, in France, and I've worked in a whole bunch of other countries. And it all really started with Cupid.
Awesome. I want to thank you all for speaking so openly and candidly about your experiences. I know as a student myself, with so many paths and opportunities ahead of me, this panel has given me lots of valuable knowledge. Before we begin the Q&A portion, though, we do have a quick poll that we would like everyone to participate in. You should see it pop up on your screen, and just take a quick moment to answer our question. Wow, it's a pretty even spread so far. I think that this is a great panel for everyone to come to. We definitely had a lot of talk about the opportunities that you can find. Definitely a lot of that persistence, polite persistence. Yeah. I think one thing that I definitely love so much about this panel and this event is that it is like targeted around women and women in the STEM fields, and that it really is eye-opening to see all of your experiences dealing with gender equality in STEM, and also seeing that you guys have shifted some of those molds and some of people's opinions about different topics in STEM, and that's really amazing to hear. Awesome. Perfect. So we will now be taking questions from participants. Once again, you can either use the raised hand function or send in your questions through the chat to myself. If you raise your hand, please turn on your camera and mic once you've been called upon. Your questions can be directed to a specific panelist or to the entire panel. So I would like to begin. I have one question from Paula D'Antonio. For Christine, what was your position at the Canadian Cancer Society specifically, the one that took you out of academia?
Oh, okay. I was hired as the what was my title? Assistant Director of Research Programs. So I was hired basically to run a couple of the research programs, but also to really run the peer review process. So to recruit scientists and put them on panels and match expertise and grants and things like that. And then I had a specific responsibility for a prostate cancer research initiative. So it was a great way to get to know the research community because I was coming from a really narrow field. I studied, I studied really basic science. I did I was an immunologist, but I really studied molecular mechanisms involved in the development of leukemia and lymphoma, transcription factors, like really a lot of mice. So to recruit panels on quality of life and palliative care and things like that was a really good experience for me to get to know the research community. So that was my first job. So I don't know why they hired me, really. I had no experience.
And I have another question from Catherine Kampula. And I believe this one's directed to Nika. Can you speak more about being politely persistent? What does that look like? And do you have any strategies to help others accomplish this?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you actually do that? I think for me, it just involved, because like I said, emails are the foundation of any success that I have today. So for example, the experience that comes to mind right now is my school has a public health magazine, the Bloomberg Public Health Journal or something like that. And I remember my first day of grad school, I walked into the building, I looked at this copy, and in my head, I was like, I'm going to be in this book before I graduate. I had no idea how I was actually going to do that. So fast forward to literally a few weeks ago, I applied for a fellowship where you could end up in that journal, and I didn't get it. So I thought, what if I just reach out to the journal myself and kind of go around the fellowship? So I reached out to the editor-in-chief, I reached out to the VP, and it starts with sending a really genuine email where you're describing why you care about the thing that you're talking about, why it's important to you, and showing that you've done your research. So I reached out to them and I said, I really care about this. I'm doing a thesis on motherhood and sex workers and HIV, and I think that's something that's really important to talk about in Côte d'Ivoire. And so it also involves some luck. So they said, okay, let's set up a phone call. We set up a phone call. They seemed really enthusiastic, and then I didn't hear back for I think 2 weeks. So I sent an email and I didn't hear back, and I sent another email and I didn't hear back, and I was like, okay, this is too much now. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to, whatever. And then they ended up responding to the second email, but 2 weeks later, because of how busy the new year was and all of that. And he is actually the one who said that to me is, I apologized during our meeting for, all the emails. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you're flooded with emails. And he said, no, like, this is exactly what you need to do. You're so politely persistent, because in none of my emails was I entitled. And none of them was I like, no, I deserve a response, because I don't. Like, the world owes me nothing. They could have never responded, and that would have been it. But I was really kind about it. I reminded them of why I cared about this journal in the first place, and why I thought this was a topic that needed to be discussed and needed to, receive the publicity that the journal would give me with it. And that was it. I think it's just a matter of, don't give up if you don't hear back the first time. Profs are people too. They have so many different things going on with them, with their families, and but sending a second email isn't necessarily a bad thing. Or, if you see someone in the hallway, going up to them isn't a bad thing. It requires some confidence, which you can certainly build, but being politely persistent in COVID times was just being a bit resilient with my emails and with the contacts that I am developing, and being prepared for the meetings. Like if you're someone's giving you their time, you need to be prepared. You need to have done your research. You need to have something in mind, so that you're not taking that person for granted. So I think for me, it's just looked like being respectful, remembering that no one owes me anything, and that keeps you humble, and then just reaching out when you feel like you still can.
Awesome. So I have a message from Cassandra Lamb. Hey everyone, your discussion has been very relatable and has provided me a lot of comfort to know I'm not alone in my thoughts. So thank you. And to the entire panel, in your opinion, what does a good workplace culture consist of? We can start with anyone who has a first response. Christine?
Yeah, so I mean, it has to involve humor. Like it has to be, there has to be, you have to develop friendships, and you have to look at things with a little bit of lightheartedness. Like there has to be, that sort of, you need to see that there isn't a fear of failure. Nika's talked about that a lot. And I think that's really important. So there has to be a feeling that you can try things and it's okay if they don't work the first time. I think there has to be that feeling of each other are there to support. You're there to support each other. It's not, you're not there to compete. I think that there has to be shared respect for, that sense of team, and that people have contributed, that everybody's contributed to victories. I talked about empathy earlier. I think that's important. I think you spend a lot of time at work in your life. You want to make sure that you like the people that you work with. I think that's really important. I do think that people, there has to be a culture of acknowledgement, and sometimes that comes down to you too. Like I was given advice one time. So I just talked about team things, and a lot of things are team based, but I was given advice once by an older woman that I was working with who said, you talk a little too much about we and could talk a little bit more about I. And so you don't want to work with or for anybody who starts every sentence with I did this, I did this, I did this. But there's also that understanding of sometimes you need to say, I led this project, or I brought this team together. So it's a fine balance, I guess, but I think that sense of that you're comfortable where you're working, you like the people that you work with, and there's a sense that everybody's kind of got each other's back.
Would either of the other panelists like to touch on what they believe a good workplace culture consists of?
I completely agree with everything Christine just said. And I think I would just add, sort of on the theme of some of the things I said earlier, and an openness about sort of sharing lives. And I think that leads to friendships, because I'm quite open about what's going on in my life and how I'm feeling. I end up being friends with my colleagues as well as colleagues. And that just makes my workplace a pretty great place to be. And I think for me also at the institutional level, flexibility is essential. I think we don't do our best work under very strict sort of, frameworks and rules or conditions. And I think, again, the pandemic has shown us we can get a lot done working from home. We can get a lot done working around other things like homeschooling children and various other things that people are dealing with. And I think, so for me, it's about, I guess that's about trust that, the organization or your supervisor and your team trusts you enough to not be checking to make sure you're doing your 9 to 5 or whatever that may be. And that's really essential for me.
I think just quickly, one last thing to add. I'm trying to think of experiences that where, so maybe something different applies. And I keep coming back to teams where I find myself very often being the youngest person on the team or one of the few females on a team. And I think in those types of dynamics, it's it's working with people who really do believe in you and are really invested in you doing well. And, you know, sometimes you don't get that right off the bat. Like sometimes I'll go on a team with, you know, some great mentors, but I still, you know, imposter syndrome still hits, and I'm still like, I'm at this table, but, you know, people haven't said the idea that I'm thinking, therefore it must not have been a good enough idea. And I remember I went to a mentor once and they were like, no, they haven't thought that because, you know, you thought that because you're intelligent, because you've had this lived experience, therefore you should have said it. So sometimes it also involves kind of making a space for yourself in a nook on that team by reaching out to different people on that team to create friendships. You know, often being the youngest, like sometimes there's some hesitancy working together with me, or, you know, if it's things related to maturity or, you know, why is she here when someone, you know, more qualified could be here. And in those positions, I always find the best thing is to just go to that person and make friends and become friends. And once that gray cloud is kind of shifted because all their like inherent biases and whatever are gone, and they realize you're a cool person, which I'm sure everyone on this call is, it ends up being really, really pleasant. So I think it's just putting yourself out there and taking care of yourself in the process, because this is, it gets exhausting having to kind of prove that you deserve to be there every single time. You shouldn't have to do that every time, but sometimes that's just the reality of it. So also making time to take care of yourself and to, you know, go back to your close friends and, you know, the people you grew up with who maybe aren't on that team, but know who you are, to kind of just feel comfortable and safe again, and then put yourself back out there when you feel ready to do so.
Awesome, thank you. Megan, if you would like to come on and ask your question, that would be amazing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Megan. Thank you, panelists. I've really enjoyed listening to all the advice you've provided. This has been really enjoyable. My question is for the entire panel. Do you have any advice for how you continue to empower women or encourage girls to get involved in STEM? And if you could share possibly a moment where you felt most empowered. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, no, Christina.
Yeah, you start. You start. Go
okay,
ahead.
I'll be quick then. I'll be quick. I think for me, I touched on it a bit earlier, but it was my discussion with Dr. Andriazza, who is the one out of 30 that responded saying yes. And it was when she said, you know, when I was your age and I was a young woman, no one gave me these opportunities. And I think that's what it's all about. It's all about paying it forward. And, you know, I'm still super early on in my career, but every time someone reaches out to me, whether it's on LinkedIn or email or whatever it is, I just funnel resources that person's way. I think about if there's space for them on the groups that I'm part of. I think about, you know, what rooms can I say that person's name in, because I remember how much has been done for me to even get to where I am today. So I think that's the first bit of paying it forward. And the second would have to be to show people that what you're doing really isn't that intimidating. Like I remember when I was younger, I was like, epidemiology is not for me. That's so much numbers. I'm not a numbers person. And I think, you know, no shade to anyone, but I think people really like what they do sound really, really complicated. And like, I'm the only person that can do this, but I've learned that that's not always the case. And if you read a little bit and you gain some skills, you could also do that too. So what I try to do is show people that, you know, what I do right now is super accessible. It required some training, a few years of training, but I can do it. So, you know, if that person is passionate about these types of things, they can do it too. So, you know, trying to make my field accessible by talking about it in a way that is authentic and that you know, makes it seem like a realistic goal for women, because it absolutely is.
So, yeah, I mean, I would encourage, I guess, so I'm obviously in STEM and I've been in science my whole career, but my career is a little bit less about the science itself and more about leadership things. And I would really encourage women to not just enter STEM fields, but think of yourself as progressing through them and take on leadership roles. And I think that it is you know, worrisome that women are still, and I don't know if anybody read Robin Doolittle's report in the Globe and Mail about the power gap. It's really interesting. And it's based on a lot of research and a lot of data, but the bottom line is that women are outnumbered, outranked, and out-earned by men still. So I guess I would really encourage everyone listening to let's try to change that. Let's try to fix that, right? Let's try to bring, more women in STEM. And I think there are a lot of women in medicine, and a lot of women enter STEM fields. My specific concern is not seeing women progress in them, and sometimes taking themselves out. So sometimes being their own worst enemy and saying that, it's too much for me to manage, or I need to cut down to 4 days a week or 3 days a week to manage with my home life. And there are other ways, like I think as women, we need to help find more creative solutions to those sort of age-old problems of balancing home and work. And maybe the answer is to say, I don't like the idea of you, young woman who's working with me cutting down to 4 days a week, because you're still going to work 6 days a week. We're just going to pay you for 4. So let's think about different ways and flexible time, and it's okay for you to respond to your emails between 9 and 11 at night, because that's when you finally have a chance. Like, I think we need to be more creative about supporting women in these roles so that we see them progress, not just enter into fields. So that's something I feel really passionate about. And, I agree with a lot. Nika said it a few times, but that, she talked about the power of email. If we weren't in a pandemic, I would also talk to you about the power of coffee, and that reaching out to someone and saying, and I say this to people all the time, reaching out to someone and saying, I heard you speak, or I saw you on LinkedIn, and I just wondered, can I buy you a coffee? I'd love to talk to you about your career. I'd like to talk to you about, we have so-and-so in common, and they suggested that you might have interesting insights about this particular field. No one will say no to you. So people like to mentor, people like to connect with people who are beginning their careers. So, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can have a pretty good conversation with someone. And right now it's really cheap because you're doing it over Zoom. So it's BYO coffee.
So, full disclosure, I don't actually really work in STEM. My path has sort of taken me very much more, as you've heard me talking about gender equality and social issues around climate change. So it has taken me in a slightly different direction, but I still work adjacent to STEM, because in the climate change field, you're dealing with a lot of technical issues and technical people. And I work a lot with governments in the global south, and primarily with environment ministries who are sort of tasked with dealing with climate change, and which means that I work a lot with a lot of men. But there are a number of women that I've had the great pleasure to work with over the last few years, who are sitting in these roles, and they're working their way up through the ranks of the public service of their countries. And so one of the things I do is just try to give them a platform whenever I can. If we're organizing a session at a conference, I try to put them forward, get them speaking, and really try to just give them more opportunities to have their voices heard and build their confidence. And I think that's really important. And I think the other thing that I would say is that even though I didn't end up sort of in a very technical role, early on, me having an engineering degree got me into jobs that really, I wouldn't have been able to. It gave me a certain credibility to start working on climate change when nobody really knew what that was about. But it was like, oh, you're an engineer, you're an environmental engineer, you must know something about this, figure it out, kind of. And so having that engineering degree has given me this way of sort of coming at issues from multiple directions. And I think it has really opened a lot of doors for me. So I feel really lucky to have been able to come at the issue in a very integrated way.
Awesome. So I believe we have time for just one more question. And I just wanted to thank you all once again for the thoughtful discussion and your experiences. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone here today in saying that your insights are extremely valuable and appreciated. And so our last question will go to Megan. If you'd like to come on and answer yours, that would be awesome.
Hi. First of all, I just wanted to say to Nika that you were actually one of my Gales a while ago, and it's really inspiring to see you up here giving this talk, so that's amazing. And my question is, we've talked a lot about how important it is to have good mentors and a positive working environment, but that's not always the case. And I was wondering if you guys could touch upon if you've ever had to struggle with that and kind of advice of how you deal with these types of situations.
Yes. And I would give this advice no matter what, but you're manage up. Like you're going to manage up a little bit. So sometimes people are, and increasingly, I find this because it comes with being more senior, but that sometimes the people that you report to or work with most closely are not the best guide for you. So as you become more expert in your particular field, you may find that, you know, the person that you report to actually isn't able to give you a lot of advice, and then you have to sort of work around that. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have you become more opinionated, I think, and I've definitely managed up, and I find that you know, I'm a lot less shy about giving feedback than I once was, and saying to the person that I may report to, for example, that you know, I don't like the way you did that, or you need to give me, you know, you need to stop interfering in this. I got this. And so I think you become a little bit blunter about it, but sometimes, you know, there's always a dance you do with people that you work with where you try to figure out where, you know, where are their strengths and how, and, you know, what are your triggers that drive you crazy, and you try and work around that a little bit. I mean, I think if things get really difficult, then you look for a new position or look for a new reporting relationship in some cases. But it definitely happens. It's you know, it's part of life, and you definitely have to figure out how to work with difficult people and how to vent your frustrations in a way that's appropriate and probably not in front of them.
I can quickly chime in here. Less about mentorship, but more about being in spaces that were female dominated. For example, in humanitarian health at Hopkins, it's female dominated, which is awesome. But I'll never forget, you know, in my first weeks going to one of our happy hours to meet everyone, and again being the youngest person there, and maybe someone with much less field experience than the people in the MPH program. You know, I overheard people, you know, just making assumptions about like, oh, I'm not just, you know, a 21-year-old wanting to go on a vacation for their Instagram or something like that. And, you know, while calling in versus calling out is hugely important, do not really, you know, try to remember that one. In this situation, I felt like it was, because it was a peer, I felt like I had the courage and the ability to say something. So, you know, I just walked into that bubble, introduced myself, and, you know, explained how, what brought me to that program, and that I actually wasn't that 21-year-old either. And that actually garnered me a lot of respect moving forward, and my name was learned. And we know in seminars and tutorials, I always had a place to speak from that moment forward, because I kind of put my foot down. Situation would be different if it was someone much more senior than me. Learning when to speak out appropriately is really, really important, but also don't censor yourself. If something has happened that you're uncomfortable by, there are people that you can speak to, whether it's higher than that person, whether it's an HR outside of that person, or whatever it may be. It's possible to find supports or to reach out to someone completely out of that to figure out a good way to deal with that. So I think just my biggest takeaway for this one would be if you're, you know, being misled, or if something happens where you feel deeply uncomfortable, absolutely you have every right and should, as, you know, a strong individual, do something about it so that you're not, you know, holding that or allowing that to debilitate you.
I know we're running out of time, so I'll just say one quick thing. One thing that I've learned in sort of navigating work relationships is it's rarely about me. Trying to understand what's going on for the other person is hugely helpful in just not taking things personally and figuring out how to sort of effectively and appropriately respond to a situation without, you know, entering into any sort of conflict or lashing out in a way that's really unhelpful. So I think that's important advice. It's rarely about you.
Awesome. We would like to thank everyone for attending QSAA's Women of Influence STEM event. The conversations we had were incredibly engaging, and we are happy to have had you all here today, especially our panelists, for the amazing answers and conversations we were able to have with you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us. It was great. And I look forward to meeting some of you someday over coffee.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.